Just to stay with the point of fact and on the secular, the allegation that the other killers are secular. Of the first one you mentioned, Adolf Hitler, it has to be said that I can almost give you the page reference of Mein Kampf, where he says that his desire to slaughter the Jews is because his fealty to the work of the Lord.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So glad you're here today. We've got a heavyweight one for you. The atheist firebrand Christopher Hitchens sits across from the Catholic apologist Dinesh D'Souza, and the question on the table is one of the oldest grenades in this whole debate. Has religion actually caused more harm than good across human history? Dinesh comes in swinging with body counts and the old godless dictators argument, and Christopher does not let a single claim slide. What follows is one of the cleanest, most surgical takedowns you'll ever see on this topic. Do yourself a favor and stick around all the way through, because the final exchange flips the entire argument on its head, and you do not want to miss how it lands. And while you're watching, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this channel reaches. Alright, enough from me. Let's get into it.
I want to get back to the basics of this debate. And Professor D'Souza, you touched on this a little bit using the free will argument. I want to know how you can reconcile your statement that belief is a good thing when so many lives have been lost due to the differing opinions of religious views.
That is true, although historically greatly overstated. The Inquisition. When I was a student at Dartmouth, if you had asked me how many people were killed in the Inquisition, I would have said hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, horrible blot on Western history. Truth of it is, these things are now carefully studied. Henry came in as a multi-volume study of the Inquisition. Spanish Inquisition was the worst. And over 350 years, the number of people killed in the Inquisition was fewer than 2,000. Now, 2,000 people, 350 years, it works out to about 5 guys a year. Not normally considered a world historical crime. Now, is that 2,000 too many? Yes. But my point is that while the atheists are often crying crocodile tears over the crimes of religion, crimes that, by the way, often occurred 500 or 1,000 years ago, what about the vastly greater crimes of atheist regimes committed in our own lifetime in the last century, and they are still going on? If you take Hitler, Stalin, and Mao alone, the three of them collectively in the space of a few decades killed close to 100 million people. And that's the tip of the iceberg. What about Ceausescu, Kim Jong-il, Fidel Castro, Pol Pot? Pol Pot, he's a junior league atheist. Normally you don't even name the guy. But his Khmer Rouge regime in Indochina following the Vietnam War kills about 2 million in about 3 years. 2 million! Even bin Laden in his wildest dreams doesn't even come close. So I'm all for looking at the historical record, but let's look at it fairly and not blame religion for crimes when there are vastly greater and more recent crimes committed by atheist regimes. Let's look at all sides of the ledger.
There's a factual and a theoretical comment to be made on that. First, I think you're flat out wrong on the Inquisition. Not that the numbers game is crucial, but the Inquisition in the Americas caused Father Bartolomeo de las Casas to convene a great meeting at the University of Salamanca to consider whether the Christian world should ever have gone as conquistadors, because the genocidal price paid by the people of old Colombia, pre-Colombia, was so high. Slavery, torture, burning. No one knows what the numbers are, but they're horrifying. The second, the 30 Years' War has to be considered a war of religion, and we don't know how many people were killed there either, but the retarding of civilization was absolutely gigantic, as well as the appalling harvest of innocent population. Third, at the beginning of the First World War, a clash of empires, all of the imperial leaders were, in a sense, theocrats. The Ottoman Empire was a theocracy by definition. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the head of the Protestant Church in Germany. The Tsar of Russia was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. The King Emperor of Britain, George V, was the head of the Church of England, as you say, rightly founded on the family values of Henry VIII. Civilization has not recovered from the retarding process of that war either. In fact, we never will get over what happened in that war. And those are wars of religion.
You have to understand what Dinesh is doing the second he opens his mouth here, because it's one of the oldest moves in the apologetics playbook. He pulls out a calculator. He tells you the Inquisition only ended a couple thousand lives over 3.5 centuries, about 5 a year, like that somehow settles it. And I'm sorry, but turning centuries of organized persecution into a tidy little spreadsheet is not the flex he thinks it is. The number being smaller than the myth does not make the institution innocent. It just means the institution was less efficient than people assumed. But here's the part that really gets me. Dinesh says atheists are crying crocodile tears over the crimes of religion, and then he immediately pivots to the big 3 dictators of the last century and a death toll near 100 million. This is the move. He wants you to believe godlessness is the common thread, and Christopher does not blink. He tells Dinesh he is flat out wrong, and then he does something brilliant. He points out that going into the First World War, the so-called secular empires were run by men who were the church. The Kaiser literally headed the Protestant church in Germany. The Tsar headed the Russian Orthodox Church. The British king was head of the Church of England. And here's what people don't realize. That's not a debate trick, that's just documented history. These were thrones fused to altars. So when Dinesh tries to file every modern catastrophe under atheism, Christopher is reminding him that the supposedly secular world he's describing was drenched in official religion from the very top down.
Just to stay with the point of fact and on the allegation that the other killers are secular. Of the first one you mentioned, Adolf Hitler, it has to be said that I can almost give you the page reference of Mein Kampf, where he says that his desire to slaughter the Jews is because his fealty to the work of the Lord. He regards it as a holy cause. That's in Mein Kampf. Maybe he doesn't have the authority to say that, but you can't call him secular. On the belt buckle of every Nazi soldier, it read, Gott mit uns, every single one of them, God on our side. Just as the Confederacy had Deo Vindice as its official motto in the Civil War for slavery. It's been calculated by the Catholic historian Paul Johnson that up to 1/3 of the SS were confessing Catholics. If you change the word fascism, if you take it out of the history of the 1930s, just remove it, pretend it doesn't exist, call it a propaganda word, insert instead extreme Christian right wing, you have not to alter, you don't have to alter a thing about the spread of fascism from Portugal through Spain, across to Croatia, to Slovakia, where the head of the Nazi puppet regime was a priest in holy orders, Father Tiso. Vichy, Austria, you know the story, or if you don't, you should. Or anyone here who considers himself a Catholic should know that. This is not, I'm sorry to say, ladies and gentlemen, secularism. Of the others, I would actually say Pol Pot had a very extreme idea of a restoration of the old Buddhist authority known as the Angkar, but let me not quarrel too much. What was wrong with these heroic mass murderers? That they all thought that they could bring about an ultimate history. They all thought that with them, history would be consummated. History would in fact come to an end. They were messianic. The whole problem to begin with is the idea that human beings can be perfected by force, or by faith, or by conquest, or by inquisition. That can take an explicitly religious form or just another messianic form, but it reinforces the point I began with. Take nothing for certain. Don't believe in any absolutism. Don't believe in any totalitarianism. Don't ask for any supreme leader in the sky or on earth, for that way lies madness and torture and murder, and always will.
May I answer briefly, just given the nature of the topic? Let me say very briefly, first of all, Las Casas was not protesting the work of the Inquisition. He was protesting the work of the conquistadors. There's a big difference between the Spaniards who came for greed and gold and to take slaves, and the church, which sent missionaries. The missionaries were on the side of the Indians and convened the debate at Salamanca, at which the Pope decided that the Indians have souls and that the Spanish conquest should be stopped. Never in human history, by the way, has a ruler ordered a conquest stopped for moral reasons, and it was the missionaries who made that argument. So factually, it is not true that the deaths of the Indians, most of which, by the way, were through malaria and other diseases to which they had no immunities, but it had nothing to do with the missionaries. It was driven by the greed of the conquistadors. The 30 Years' War. Look at the history of the 30 Years' War and you'll see, look at the alliances. If they broke down neatly into Catholic versus Protestant, you could say perhaps it's a religious war, but they didn't. Catholic France began to ally with the Protestants the moment that the Protestants began to lose. Right away, you see that territorial wars over power and land are now being presented as wars of religion.
This right here is where the whole secular killer's argument falls apart, and Christopher does it with a single image. He brings up the belt buckle worn by every soldier in the Nazi army and what was stamped on it. Christopher points out it read Gott mit uns, God with us. And let me give you a little history, because this matters. That phrase was not some accident. Gott mit uns had been a Prussian and German military motto for generations before the Nazis ever existed. It sat on the soldiers' belts. God on our side. That is the opposite of an atheist army. Then Christopher drops the fact that always gets buried in these debates. He cites the estimate that up to a third of the SS were confessing Catholics, not lapsed, confessing. And here's the part that blows my mind. Christopher hands Dinesh a challenge. Take the word fascism out of the 1930s, swap in extreme Christian right wing, and you do not have to change a single fact about how it spread across Europe. He even names Father Tiso, an actual priest in holy orders who ran a Nazi puppet state in Slovakia. A priest running a puppet regime. And then Christopher lands the real point, the one that's bigger than any death toll. He says the true danger is the messianic idea that human beings can be perfected by force, by faith, by conquest, or by inquisition. That is the thread, not atheism, the certainty. The belief that someone holds the final answer and has the right to force it onto everyone. That's what connects the darkest chapters of history, and it wears 1,000 different costumes.
Was World War I a religious war? That would make every war a religious war. World War II was a religious war. In other words, just because France is Catholic and England is Protestant doesn't make it a religious war if they're fighting over territory. Hitler. Now, here we have to be a little careful, because in Mein Kampf, Hitler has a long section on propaganda in which he says, do not be afraid to lie to make your case. There is a book edited by the distinguished historian Hugh Trevor Roper called Hitler's Table Talk. It gives detailed accounts assembled by Martin Boring himself of Hitler's views on a wide range of subjects. Hitler hated Christianity. He was not a religious believer. He might have been some sort of a Teutonic pagan. He might have believed a weird form of ancient polytheism, but no recognizable form of monotheism, and he detested Christianity. So I'm doing the Lord's work was tactical. He wanted the support of the Bavarian Catholics and the Lutheran Protestants, and so he invented what he called the Aryan Christ, the Christ who comes back to avenge himself on the Jews. The churches didn't go for it. So this is a complex history. I've written about it myself. The bottom line of it is, my point isn't that Hitler was an atheist, but that the 20th century saw secular regimes which tried to get rid of traditional religion and morality and establish a new man and a new utopia, the secular paradise. And look what it brought us, an ocean of blood, a mountain of bodies. So for this reason, I'm concluding that it is this effort to enforce secular utopia and not religion that is responsible for the mass murders of history.
You can reply quickly if you like, and then we'll go back to
I'll be very
questions.
quick.
I'm going to let the questions go about 8 minutes over time because we started late, and then we'll wrap up.
No, I should be quick. In that case, Dinesh, you gracefully withdraw the allegation that National Socialism and Fascism were secular or atheistic, and I'm grateful for your generosity. Second, that people change sides in religious wars for opportunist reasons doesn't particularly surprise me. You can spend a lot of time telling a Protestant in Northern Ireland who has a picture of King William painted on the side of his house that when King William fought the Battle of the Boyne, his ally was the Pope. The Protestant sort of knows this, the Ulster Protestant, but he doesn't really believe it's true. Happens to be true. Of course it's opportunistic. Why is it opportunistic? Because religion is man-made, as I began by saying. It's what you would expect if religion was the creation of aggressive, fearful primates. It's exactly what you would expect. And the same would be true of its non-religious attempts to create paradise, because it's asking too much of people, and it leads to fanaticism and torture and murder and war. So all you succeed in doing is replacing the question. No, there's no teleology. No, there's no eschatology. No, there's no ultimate history. No, there's no redemption. No, there are no supreme leaders here or anywhere else. Thank you.
Now Dinesh tries to climb back, and I'll give him this. It's his strongest moment. He argues that the First and Second World Wars weren't religious wars just because one side was Catholic and the other Protestant, and he insists the Nazi leader actually detested Christianity and only played the believer to win over Catholic and Lutheran voters. And you know what? Part of that is fair. But watch what Christopher does, because it's surgical. Christopher never claimed the Nazi leader was a devout man. That was never the argument. So when Christopher says Dinesh gracefully withdraws the allegation that fascism was secular or atheistic, and thanks him for his generosity, he is pointing out something huge. Dinesh just quietly gave up the exact ground he walked in to defend. You do not get to spend 10 minutes blaming godlessness for the horrors of the last century, and then admit the foot soldiers wore God with us on their belts. You have to pick one. And here is the closer that I think about all the time. Christopher says religion is man-made. He calls it the creation of frightened, aggressive early humans trying to make sense of a world they could not explain. And then he refuses to hand the trophy to anybody. No eschatology, no ultimate history, no redemption, no supreme leader in the sky or on the ground. That is the whole thing for me. Christopher is not telling you to swap one master for another. He is telling you to stop kneeling. Stop hunting for the one being, human or divine, who gets to decide the final shape of everybody else's life. Because every single time human beings have handed someone that kind of total authority, whether they pointed to a holy book or a glorious future paradise, it ended in the same place. The label on the flag changes. The certainty underneath never does. And that, to me, is the most honest thing said in this entire exchange. It's not an attack on belief. It's a warning about what happens when belief stops asking questions. And it lands harder today than when this debate happened, because we are still surrounded by people, on every side, certain they hold the one answer for everyone else. Christopher is begging you to keep one small door open in your mind. The door marked "I could be wrong." That is not weakness. It is the only thing that has ever protected ordinary people from those who think they speak for history itself. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.